The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as Winona Whitaker stood at the edge of her family's property, her heart pounding in her chest, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. Behind her lay everything she had ever known: a life of wealth, security, and suffocation. Ahead of her stretched nothing but miles of unforgiving desert and an uncertain future. The year was 1876, and at 20 years old, Winona had just committed the ultimate act of defiance. Rejecting the arranged marriage her father had spent months orchestrating with the aging banking magnate Reginald Thornton. "You'll be back," her father had sneered, tossing her small carpetbag onto the ground at her feet. "When you're starving and desperate, you'll wish you'd been sensible enough to accept Thornton's proposal. No daughter of mine refuses to do her duty." The slam of the heavy oak door still echoed in her mind as Winona trudged forward, her once fine boots already coated with dust, her blue calico dress, the plainest one she owned, sticking to her skin in the oppressive heat. She had taken only what she could carry: a change of clothes, her mother's silver hairbrush, and the small amount of money she had secretly saved over the years. "I will never go back," she whispered to the empty landscape. "I would rather die than be sold like cattle to a man 3 times my age." Vulture City, Arizona was still a half-day's walk ahead, and Winona knew her water wouldn't last that long. The mining town was her only hope. Perhaps she could find work as a seamstress or a teacher. She was educated, at least, though her father had always considered this an unfortunate necessity rather than an advantage. 4 hours later, the water was gone, and Winona's steps had slowed to an uneven shuffle. The sun hung mercilessly overhead, and dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. Her fair skin, unused to such exposure, had turned an angry red despite the bonnet that offered minimal protection. It was the sound of hoofbeats that finally broke through her haze of misery. Winona turned, squinting against the sunlight to make out a lone rider approaching from the direction she had come. Panic gripped her. Had her father sent someone after her? She looked around frantically, but there was nowhere to hide in the open desert. The rider slowed as he approached, and Winona could finally make out his features beneath the wide-brimmed hat. He was younger than she expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and keen blue eyes that assessed her with immediate concern. His horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, pawed at the ground as the man pulled it to a stop several feet away. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and tinged with a slight drawl, "you look like you could use some help." He surveyed her disheveled appearance with a frown. "It's mighty dangerous for a lady to be walking these parts alone." Winona straightened her shoulders, summoning what dignity she could. "I'm perfectly fine, sir. I'm on my way to Vulture City." The stranger's eyebrows rose. "That's still 8 miles from here." "You've got no water from the looks of it, and you're about 1 step away from heat stroke." He dismounted in one fluid motion, removing his canteen from his saddle. "Name's Dawson Alden. Most folks call me Daw." Winona hesitated before accepting the canteen. "Winona Whitaker," she replied, taking a small, measured sip despite her body's demand for more. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Alden, but I should continue on my way." Dawson took in her fine, if dusty, clothes and the determined set of her jaw. His eyes flicked to the direction she had come from, then back to her sunburned face. "Running from something, Miss Whitaker," her chin lifted. "That's none of your concern." A slight smile touched his lips. "Fair enough. But whatever you're running from, you won't outrun the sun." He gestured to his horse. "Ride with me. I'm headed to Vulture City myself." Winona stared at him, torn between caution and desperate necessity. "Why would you help a stranger?" Dawson shrugged, his expression softening. Because my ma taught me never to leave someone in need when I had the means to help, and because these parts aren't forgiving to those who don't respect them." He held out his hand. "So what do you say? Ride with me." In that moment, staring into the honest blue eyes of Dawson Alden, Winona made a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. She placed her hand in his and allowed him to help her onto his horse. "Thank you," she said quietly, settling behind him as he mounted. "Hold tight," he instructed, and Winona hesitantly placed her hands at his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his cotton shirt. As the horse set off at a steady pace toward Vulture City, Winona felt something unfamiliar stir within her, not just relief, but a tentative flicker of hope. For the first time since leaving her father's house, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps she hadn't made the biggest mistake of her life after all. The rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them, and the solid presence of Dawson in front of her lulled Winona into a more relaxed state than she had experienced in days. The landscape passed by with hypnotic sameness: sand, scrub brush, and the occasional cactus, but at least they were moving at a decent pace now. "May I ask what brings you to Vulture City?" Dawson broke the silence after they had ridden for nearly an hour. Winona tensed slightly behind him. "I'm seeking employment," she answered carefully. "What kind of employment? I'm educated. I can read and write, do arithmetic. I can sew quite well." Pride crept into her voice despite her circumstances. "I thought perhaps I might find work as a teacher or a seamstress." Dawson nodded, though she couldn't see his face. "Vulture City's growing fast with the gold mines. They might need a teacher, though I can't say for certain." He paused. "You have family there?" "No," Winona admitted. "I don't know anyone in Vulture City." "And the family you do have? They know where you're headed?" Winona's hands tightened involuntarily against his waist. "I would prefer they didn't." Dawson didn't press further, and Winona was grateful for his restraint. They rode in silence for a while longer before he spoke again. "I run the livery stable in town," he said conversationally. "Been there about 3 years now. It's not a grand establishment, but it's mine, and the miners need somewhere to keep their horses." "You own it?" Winona asked, surprised. He seemed young to be a business owner. "Lock, stock, and barrel," he confirmed with a hint of pride. "Worked for the previous owner for 2 years, saved every penny. When old Ferguson wanted to head back east to be with his daughter, I bought him out." He chuckled. "Never thought I'd end up a businessman, but I love working with horses, and it turns out I'm not half bad at the business side of things too." Winona felt a twinge of admiration. Here was a man who had built something for himself through hard work, not through family connections or arranged business partnerships like her father's associates. "That's commendable," she said sincerely. "It's nothing special," he replied modestly. "Just doing what needs doing. That's the way of things out here." As they crested a small rise, Vulture City came into view in the distance, a sprawling collection of wooden buildings nestled at the base of arid hills. Even from afar, Winona could see the activity of the mining town. Wagons moving along the main street, people going about their business, smoke rising from chimneys despite the heat. "There she is," Dawson said, a note of fondness in his voice. "Not much to look at compared to wherever you're from, I expect, but it's home to me now." Winona felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. Now that her destination was in sight, the reality of her situation hit her anew. She had nowhere to stay, limited funds, and no guarantee of finding work. "Is there a respectable boarding house for single women?" she asked, trying to keep the worry from her voice. Dawson nodded. "Mrs. Holloway runs a place for ladies. It's clean and proper, though it might be full. There's also the hotel, but—" He hesitated. "But it's expensive," Winona finished for him. She had enough money for perhaps a week at a decent hotel, but no more. "I might be able to help," Dawson said after a moment's consideration. "My assistant at the livery has a room above the stable he isn't using. He moved in with his new wife last month. It's small, but it's private. You could stay there while you look for work." Winona stiffened. "I couldn't possibly." "It's not charity," Dawson cut in, seemingly reading her thoughts. "You said you can read and write. I'm terrible with the bookkeeping. You could help with that in exchange for the room, at least until you find something better." Winona hesitated. The offer was tempting, but she was wary of putting herself under obligation to a man she had just met, no matter how kind he seemed. "You'd be doing me a favor," Dawson added. "The room's just sitting empty and I'm falling behind on the accounts." As they rode into town, Winona was struck by the bustling activity around them. Men in dusty clothes moved with purpose, carrying tools or pushing carts. Women in practical dresses hurried along the wooden sidewalks, many carrying baskets or parcels. The buildings were utilitarian but solid saloons with swinging doors, a general store, what looked like a small bank, and various other businesses that made up the lifeblood of a mining town. "I'll consider your offer," Winona said finally as they approached a large wooden structure that must be the livery stable. The sign hanging above the wide doors read simply, "Alden's Livery." Dawson dismounted and reached up to help her down. His hands were strong and calloused against her waist, and for a brief, disconcerting moment, Winona was aware of how close they were as he set her gently on the ground. "Take your time deciding," he said, leading his horse toward the stable doors. "But at least come in and rest a spell. You look dead on your feet, and the sun's still high." The interior of the stable was blessedly cool and smelled of hay, leather, and horses, not unpleasant scents to Winona, who had grown up riding at her family's estate. Several horses nickered in their stalls as Dawson led his mount inside. "Hank," Dawson called out, "you here?" A lanky young man with straw-colored hair emerged from the back, wiping his hands on a rag. "Here, boss." His curious gaze fell on Winona and he quickly removed his hat. "Madam." "Hank, this is Miss Whitaker. She's new in town. I found her walking in from the east, about to collapse from the heat." Dawson handed the reins of his horse to Hank. "Give Thunder a good rub-down, would you? We rode hard." "Yes, sir." Hank led the horse away, casting another curious glance at Winona. "Come on," Dawson said, gesturing toward a small office at the side of the stable. "Let's get you sitting down." The office was simple but neat, with a desk covered in papers, a couple of wooden chairs, and shelves lined with ledgers and various items related to horse tack and care. A small window let in light, and a pot-bellied stove stood cold in the corner. Winona sank gratefully into the chair Dawson offered, removing her bonnet and setting it in her lap. She knew she must look a fright, her auburn hair escaping its pins, her face sunburned and streaked with dust. Dawson poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drink slowly," he cautioned. As she sipped, Winona glanced around the office, her gaze falling on the ledgers. "Are those your accounts?" she asked. Dawson nodded, running a hand through his dark hair with a grimace. "Such as they are. I can calculate well enough, but keeping everything organized." He shook his head. "Let's just say it's not my strong suit." Winona set down her cup and stood, moving to the desk despite her exhaustion. She opened one of the ledgers and scanned the entries, her brow furrowing at the haphazard way information had been recorded. "You've been charging different rates to different customers," she observed, flipping through more pages. Dawson looked sheepish. "Some folks can pay more than others. Widow Jenkins can barely afford to keep her mare, but she needs it to get around since her husband passed. The mining company can afford full price for their mules." Winona raised an eyebrow, but there was a hint of admiration in her expression. That's unusually considerate. But it makes your bookkeeping even more complicated. Tell me about it, Dawson sighed. Winona studied the ledger for a few more moments, her mind already working on how to organize the information more efficiently. She was tired and uncertain about her future, but this was something she could do, something familiar in a world that had suddenly become very unfamiliar. "I'll take your offer," she said abruptly, looking up at Dawson. "For the room in exchange for putting your books in order. But only until I find more permanent employment." Relief and something else, pleasure, flickered across Dawson's face. "That's fair. I'll show you the room after you've rested a bit." He hesitated. "And perhaps we should get you some dinner. The restaurant at the hotel serves decent food." Winona opened her mouth to protest the expense, but Dawson held up a hand. "It's just dinner, Miss Whitaker. No strings attached. You've had a trying day from the looks of it." The sincerity in his blue eyes made it difficult to refuse. Winona nodded, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. "Thank you, Mr. Alden." "Dawson, please," he said with a small smile. "If you're going to be keeping my books, we might as well use first names." "Dawson," she repeated softly, and for the first time that day, Winona returned his smile. "And you may call me Winona." The room above the stable was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a small table with a chair, and a chest of drawers. A window overlooked the main street, letting in both light and the sounds of the town. It was Spartan compared to her room at home, but to Winona it represented freedom. "It's not much," Dawson said apologetically, setting her carpetbag on the bed, "but it's private and no one will bother you here." "It's perfect," Winona replied honestly. "I'll make it comfortable." After showing her where to find the outhouse and how to use the pump for water, Dawson left her to freshen up before dinner, promising to return in an hour. Alone at last, Winona sank onto the bed, the events of the day crashing down on her. She had done it. She had escaped the prison of her father's expectations and the revolting prospect of marriage to Reginald Thornton. But freedom, she was quickly learning, came with its own challenges. She was entirely dependent on herself now and temporarily, on the kindness of a stranger with kind eyes and an honest smile. Winona unpacked her few belongings, washed her face and hands, and did her best to make herself presentable. Her dress was wrinkled and dusty, but there was nothing to be done about that now. She brushed her long auburn hair and pinned it back up, taking comfort in the familiar routine. When Dawson knocked on her door an hour later, Winona felt more like herself again, despite her circumstances. They walked together to the hotel restaurant, with Dawson pointing out various establishments along the way. "That's Dr. Hamilton's office, good doctor. Doesn't drink much. The general store is owned by the Peterson brothers, fair prices, though Mrs. Gunderson's mercantile at the end of the street has better fabric if you're looking to sew. The bank," he gestured to a solid building with barred windows, "is run by Franklin Mercer. Bit of a stiff, but honest enough." Winona absorbed the information, noting the easy way Dawson greeted people as they passed. He was clearly well regarded in town, receiving respectful nods from men and shy smiles from several young women who eyed Winona with undisguised curiosity. The hotel restaurant was modest but clean, with tablecloths and proper cutlery. As they were seated, Winona felt the weight of stares from other diners and heard the low murmur of whispers. In a small town like this, a new face, particularly one in the company of an eligible bachelor like Dawson, was bound to cause a stir. "Don't mind them," Dawson said quietly, noticing her discomfort. "News travels fast in Vulture City. By tomorrow, they'll have something new to gossip about." "What will they say about me?" Winona asked, genuinely curious. Dawson's lips quirked upward. That depends on what story you want to tell, why you're here, where you came from. Winona considered this as she studied the simple menu. The truth, I suppose, though not all of it. I left my father's house because he wanted me to marry a man I could not abide. I came here seeking a new start. She looked up at him. Is that straightforward enough? It's more than most people share, Dawson said with approval. And it has the benefit of being true without inviting too many questions. After they ordered roast beef with potatoes and vegetables, Winona found herself genuinely enjoying Dawson's company. He was easy to talk to, intelligent without being showy, and possessed a dry wit that made her laugh despite her fatigue. He told her stories of growing up on a small ranch in Texas, of learning to break horses from his father, and of his decision to head west after his parents died of influenza within months of each other. I had nothing keeping me there, he explained, his eyes momentarily shadowed by old grief. So I packed what I had and followed the sun west. I'm sorry about your parents, Winona said softly. It was 7 years ago now, Dawson replied. The pain fades, though you never stop missing them. He gave her a questioning look. Your mother, you haven't mentioned her. Winona tensed slightly. She passed when I was 14, a riding accident. Even after 6 years, the memory brought a lump to her throat. She was, different from my father, gentler. She would never have forced me into marriage. Dawson nodded, understanding in his eyes. And your father? Will he come looking for you? Perhaps, Winona admitted, setting down her fork. He has business connections in many places, but I don't think he'll try too hard. His pride was wounded more than his heart when I left. She squared her shoulders. In any case, I won't go back, not ever. You're safe here, Dawson said simply, and you'll find your footing. You strike me as a determined sort. The warmth in his voice brought a flush to Winona's cheeks that had nothing to do with her sunburn. Thank you for everything today, Dawson. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. Just lucky timing, he said with a modest shrug. And selfishness on my part now. I'll finally have proper bookkeeping. Winona laughed, and the sound surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed genuinely. Her life in Philadelphia had become increasingly stifled as her father tightened his control, especially after announcing her engagement to Thornton 2 months ago. After dinner, they walked back to the livery in the gathering dusk, the air cooling rapidly as it tended to do in the desert. The town had a different energy in the evening, more boisterous, with piano music spilling from the saloons and men's voices raised in laughter or argument. It gets lively at night, Dawson commented as they passed the largest saloon, the Lucky Strike. But you'll be safe enough above the stable. Nobody goes there without my say-so. At the livery, Dawson lit a lantern for her and walked her to the stairs that led to her room. I'll be up early, habit from years of ranch life, but you sleep as late as you need. You've had a long day. Winona paused at the foot of the stairs, lantern in hand. I'll be up early too. I want to start on those books. She hesitated. Good night, Dawson, and thank you again. Good night, Winona, he replied softly. Sleep well. As Winona climbed the stairs to her small room, she found herself thinking that, for someone who had lost everything in a single day, she had been remarkably fortunate. Reaching the top of the stairs, she turned to look back and found Dawson still watching from below, concern and something else, something warmer in his gaze. He tipped his hat to her and turned away, and Winona entered her room with an unfamiliar flutter in her chest. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt something besides fear and determination, a tiny spark of possibility that perhaps her new life could hold more than mere survival. That night, Winona slept deeply, despite the unfamiliar sounds of the town and the narrow, hard bed. Her dreams were a jumble of images: her father's angry face, Thornton's cold eyes, the endless desert, but they faded as morning light filled her small room. She rose early, washed at the basin, and dressed in her second dress, a pale yellow cotton that had fared better in her bag than the blue one. After pinning her hair in a simple but neat style, Winona made her way downstairs, following the sound of voices and the smell of coffee. Dawson was in the stable yard, instructing Hank on the care of a beautiful Palomino mare. He wore a clean white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing tanned, muscular forearms as he demonstrated how to check the horse's hoof for stones. When he caught sight of Winona, he straightened, a smile lighting his features. "Good morning," he called. "There's coffee in the office if you're interested." "Good morning," Winona replied, suddenly self-conscious under the curious stare of Hank and another stable hand she hadn't met yet. "Boys, you know Miss Whitaker will be helping with the books," Dawson said to his employees. "She'll be staying in the room upstairs for a while." The men nodded respectfully, though Winona could see the questions in their eyes. She nodded back and headed for the office, where she found a pot of coffee on a small stove and a tin mug waiting. She poured herself a cup, grateful for the strong brew after her long sleep. Looking around the cluttered office, Winona felt a surge of determination. This, at least, was something she could manage. Her father might have intended her education only to make her a more attractive prospect for marriage, but she had excelled in mathematics and organization. By the time Dawson came in 20 minutes later, she had already sorted the ledgers by date and was making notes on a sheet of paper. "You didn't waste any time," he observed, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "I like having a purpose," Winona replied without looking up, "and these books are in desperate need of attention." Dawson chuckled. "I warned you they were a mess." "You did," she agreed, finally meeting his eyes. "But it's fixable. I'll need a few days to get everything properly organized and to create a system you can maintain moving forward." "Take all the time you need," Dawson said, leaning against the desk. "Meanwhile, I thought you might like to look around town today, get your bearings. I have deliveries to make this morning, so I could show you around." Winona hesitated. On one hand, she was eager to start proving her worth. On the other, she did need to familiarize herself with Vulture City if she was going to find more permanent employment. That would be helpful, she decided. "I should inquire at the school about teaching positions. And perhaps get a few supplies for yourself," Dawson suggested. "I noticed you traveled light." Winona flushed. "I left in something of a hurry, but I have enough money for necessities." Dawson nodded, not pressing the point. "I'll be ready to go in about an hour if that suits you." "It does," Winona said, returning to her notes. "I'll continue sorting through these until then." As the morning progressed, Winona found herself settling into an unexpected comfort with her new situation. The work was straightforward, the stable atmosphere was pleasant, and Dawson was respectful of her space while remaining attentive to her needs. When they set out to tour the town, Winona was struck by how different Vulture City looked in the full light of day. The buildings, while utilitarian, had a frontier charm. People moved with purpose, and there was an energy to the place that spoke of growth and opportunity. The general store was their first stop, where Dawson introduced her to the Peterson brothers, middle-aged twins with identical beards and friendly manners. Winona purchased some basic toiletries, a notebook and pencil for her accounting work, and a few other small necessities. "Put it on my account, George," Dawson told the shopkeeper when Winona reached for her purse. "No, please," she protested. "I can pay for my own things." "Consider it an advance on your wages," Dawson said firmly. "You're providing a service to my business after all." Winona reluctantly agreed, though she insisted on keeping the purchase modest. As they left the store, she noticed several women watching them with undisguised interest from across the street. "I believe we're causing quite a stir," she murmured to Dawson. He glanced at the women and sighed. "Vulture City has a shortage of unmarried women," he explained. "Any new arrival causes excitement, especially one as," he faltered momentarily, "as refined as yourself." Winona felt a blush creeping up her neck at the almost compliment. "Well, they needn't get too excited. I'm here to work, not to find a husband. I've had quite enough of that particular pursuit." Something flickered in Dawson's eyes: disappointment, relief. It was gone before Winona could identify it. "The school is this way," he said, gesturing down a side street. "It's not much, but the town's growing fast enough that they've been talking about expanding it." The schoolhouse was indeed modest, a single-room building with rows of benches and a teacher's desk at the front. A stern-looking woman in her 40s was instructing about 20 children of various ages when they arrived. She looked up with irritation at the interruption, but her expression softened slightly when Dawson removed his hat. "Miss Granger," he said politely. "Sorry to interrupt. This is Miss Whitaker, new to town." She was hoping to inquire about teaching positions. Miss Granger's gaze swept over Winona, assessing her with cool efficiency. "Wait outside, please. I'll be with you when the lesson is finished." They stepped back out into the sunlight, and Winona bit her lip. "She doesn't seem particularly welcoming." "Harriet Granger has been teaching here for 15 years, Dawson explained. "She's strict but fair. The children learn well from her." 10 minutes later, Miss Granger emerged from the schoolhouse, closing the door firmly behind her. Up close, Winona could see that her severe appearance was somewhat softened by intelligent eyes and what might, under different circumstances, be a kind mouth. "You're interested in a teaching position?" she asked without preamble. "Yes," Winona replied. "I'm well educated in literature, mathematics, history, and the sciences. I speak French and have some Latin." "Where did you receive your education?" Miss Granger interrupted. "Miss Porter's school in Farmington, Connecticut, and private tutors," Winona answered, lifting her chin slightly. Miss Granger's eyebrows rose a fraction. "And what brings someone with such credentials to Vulture City, Arizona?" Winona hesitated, but decided on honesty. "I'm seeking independence, Miss Granger. I left my father's house to avoid an unwanted marriage and to make my own way." The older woman studied her for a long moment. "We have no position available at present," she said finally. "I manage quite well on my own. However," she added as Winona's face fell, "the town council has been discussing hiring an assistant teacher as more families arrive. It may be a few months before anything is decided." "I see," Winona said, trying to hide her disappointment. "In the meantime," Miss Granger continued, "I could use someone to help with grading papers and preparing lessons once or twice a week. It wouldn't be much, perhaps $2 a week, but it would allow me to evaluate your capabilities." Hope surged through Winona. It wasn't a full position, but it was something, a connection to the work she hoped to do, and a small income to supplement what she would earn helping Dawson. "I would be very grateful for the opportunity," she said sincerely. "Come by tomorrow after school ends at 3, Miss Granger instructed. "We'll discuss the particulars then." With a nod to Dawson, she returned to the schoolhouse. As they walked away, Winona couldn't contain her smile. "It's not much, but it's a start. It's more than most newcomers get from Harriet Granger," Dawson said, looking impressed. "She must have seen something in you." The rest of their tour included the bank, the post office, Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, full as Dawson had predicted, and finally, Mrs. Gunderson's mercantile. The elderly shopkeeper took an immediate liking to Winona, showing her fabrics and notions with enthusiasm. "You sew, dear?" she asked, noting Winona's knowledgeable examination of the materials. "Yes, quite well," Winona replied. "I made this dress myself." Mrs. Gunderson's eyes lit up. "Did you now? We could use someone with fine sewing skills. Most of the ladies here can manage basic mending, but anything fancy has to be ordered from Phoenix or Tucson. Are you offering me work?" Winona asked, surprised at how quickly opportunities seemed to be presenting themselves. "I might be," the older woman said thoughtfully. "Not full-time, mind you, but I get requests for special items, wedding dresses, christening gowns, that sort of thing. I could send them your way for a small commission." By the time they left the mercantile, Winona had arranged to sew a dress for the banker's wife's upcoming birthday, a simple but elegant afternoon dress in blue silk that would pay enough to cover her expenses for at least 2 weeks. "You're making quite an impression on Vulture City," Dawson observed as they headed back toward the livery, his deliveries completed. "Teaching, sewing, bookkeeping, you're a woman of many talents, Winona Whitaker." "Necessity breeds versatility," she replied with a small smile. "But I am grateful for how things are unfolding. I was prepared for a much harder landing when I left Philadelphia." "Philadelphia," Dawson exclaimed. "That's quite a journey. You never mentioned you'd come so far." Winona tensed, realizing she had revealed more than intended. "Yes, well, I wanted a complete change." Dawson seemed to sense her discomfort and didn't press further. "You've had a good start," he said instead. "Hungry? We could stop at Clara's cafe for lunch before heading back." The small cafe was busier than Winona expected, filled with miners on their break and townspeople going about their business. Clara herself, a plump woman in her 50s with a booming laugh and flour-dusted hands, greeted Dawson like an old friend. "Dawson Alden. About time you showed your face in here this week," she called from behind the counter. Her curious gaze fell on Winona. "And who's this lovely young lady?" "Clara, this is Winona Whitaker," Dawson introduced. "She's new in town, helping me with my bookkeeping and working with Miss Granger at the school." Clara's eyebrows shot up. "Harriet Granger is sharing her classroom." "Well, I never." She extended a flowery hand to Winona. "Welcome to Vulture City, Miss Whitaker. Any friend of Dawson's is a friend of mine." They were seated at a small table by the window, and Winona found herself relaxing in the homey atmosphere. The food, beef stew with fresh bread, was simple but delicious, and the conversation flowed easily between them. It was as they were finishing their meal that Winona noticed a commotion at the entrance of the cafe. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache and expensive clothes had entered, flanked by 2 rough-looking individuals who were clearly hired muscle rather than friends. "That's Maxwell Jenkins," Dawson said in a low voice, following her gaze. "Owns the largest mine in the area. Not a man to cross." Jenkins surveyed the cafe with the air of someone who believed he owned everyone in it, not just the mine they worked in. His gaze fell on Dawson and narrowed slightly, then shifted to Winona. A slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face, and he began making his way toward their table. Dawson straightened, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. "Maxwell," he said with a nod that was polite but noticeably cool. "Alden," Jenkins replied, his attention fixed on Winona. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your lovely companion?" Something in the man's tone made Winona's skin crawl, but she maintained her composure, years of social training coming to her aid. "Miss Whitaker, this is Maxwell Jenkins," Dawson said formally. "Mr. Jenkins, Miss Winona Whitaker." "Charmed," Jenkins said, taking Winona's hand before she could offer it and bringing it to his lips in a gesture that might have been gallant from someone else but felt invasive from him. "You're new to our little town." "Yes," Winona replied, withdrawing her hand as soon as politeness allowed. "I arrived yesterday, and already in the company of our local horse trader," Jenkins observed with a smirk. "You move quickly, Alden." Dawson's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. "Miss Whitaker is helping with the bookkeeping at the livery and will be assisting at the school. She's a highly educated lady." Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? Well, Miss Whitaker, should you find yourself interested in more profitable employment, my mining office is always looking for a refined touch. The salary would be considerably more than what a stable keeper or schoolmarm could offer." The implication in his tone was impossible to miss, and Winona felt a surge of disgust. This man was no different from Reginald Thornton, seeing her as something to be bought and possessed. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins, but I'm quite satisfied with my current arrangements," she said, her voice cool and firm. Jenkins's eyes hardened momentarily before his smile returned, more forced than before. "The offer stands should you change your mind." He tipped his hat. "Alden, Miss Whitaker." As he walked away to join his men at a larger table, Winona released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I apologize for that," Dawson said quietly. "Jenkins believes his money entitles him to whatever and whoever he wants." "I'm familiar with the type," Winona replied, her appetite gone. "My father's social circle was full of such men." Dawson studied her face for a moment, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Was that the kind of man your father wanted you to marry?" Winona nodded, looking down at her plate. "Reginald Thornton, 53 years old, twice widowed, with children older than me. But rich, obscenely rich, and willing to invest in my father's business ventures." Dawson's expression darkened with anger on her behalf. "No wonder you ran." "I had no choice," Winona said simply. "It was leave or—" She trailed off, unwilling to voice the despair that had driven her to flee with nothing but a carpetbag and her savings. "You made the right choice," Dawson said firmly. "And for what it's worth, I'm glad your path crossed mine yesterday." The sincerity in his voice warmed something inside Winona, and she managed a small smile. "So am I." As the days turned into weeks, Winona settled into a rhythm in Vulture City. Mornings were devoted to organizing Dawson's accounts, which were gradually taking shape under her meticulous attention. Afternoons found her either at the school with Miss Granger or at her small table in her room, sewing garments for the growing list of clients Mrs. Gunderson sent her way. The room above the stable began to feel like home, decorated with small touches, wildflowers in a jar, a colorful quilt purchased from Mrs. Gunderson, sketches of horses Winona had drawn during quiet moments. She had used some of her earnings to buy a few additional dresses and necessities, though she remained frugal, saving as much as possible for whatever the future might hold. Dawson, for his part, proved to be the most considerate of hosts and employers. He respected her privacy, never entering her room without invitation, yet he was attentive to her comfort, ensuring she had everything she needed. They fell into an easy working relationship, with Winona's organized systems bringing new efficiency to the livery's operations. But it was their evenings that Winona came to treasure most, sharing dinner at Clara's cafe, or occasionally cooking simple meals in the small kitchen area of the stable, then sitting in the office or on the porch in fine weather, talking until the stars emerged. Dawson told stories of his adventures before settling in Vulture City, and Winona gradually shared more of her own past, her stifled upbringing, her mother's gentle influence, her love of literature and learning. "I never understood why my father bothered educating me at all, if all he wanted was to marry me off to the highest bidder," she confessed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Perhaps your mother insisted, Dawson suggested, his profile outlined in the fading light. Perhaps, Winona agreed. She always encouraged my studies, even when Father complained that I was becoming too opinionated. She smiled at the memory. She would say that a sharp mind was a woman's true dowry. She sounds like a wise woman, Dawson said. I think she'd be proud of you now. The comment touched Winona deeply. I hope so, she whispered. It was on such evenings that Winona began to recognize the feelings growing within her feelings that went beyond gratitude or friendship. There was something about Dawson Alden, his quiet strength, his integrity, his genuine respect for her as a person rather than a possession that drew her to him in ways she had never experienced with any of the polished society men her father had paraded before her in Philadelphia. But she guarded these feelings carefully, unsure if they were reciprocated and wary of complicating the stability she had found. She had come to Vulture City seeking independence, not romance, and she reminded herself of this whenever she caught herself watching Dawson a moment too long or feeling a flutter in her chest when their hands accidentally touched over the account books. One Saturday afternoon, nearly a month after her arrival, Winona was returning from delivering a completed dress to Mrs. Mercer, the banker's wife, when she noticed unusual activity at the livery. Several horses were saddled in the yard, and Dawson was loading supplies into saddlebags with a focused efficiency she recognized from busy days at the stable. "What's happening?" she asked, approaching him. Dawson looked up, concern evident in his expression. "The Holloway boy, Timothy, didn't come home from a hunting trip yesterday. Mrs. Holloway came by this morning frantic. We're organizing a search party." "How old is he?" Winona asked, setting down her sewing basket. 12, Dawson replied grimly. "Old enough to handle a rifle, but not experienced enough to be out alone overnight. His father's away on business in Tucson." Winona felt her heart clench at the thought of a child alone in the desert. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Dawson seemed about to refuse, then reconsidered. "Actually, yes. Clara's preparing food for the searchers. If you could help her, make sure there's plenty of water packed. We could be out there a while." Winona nodded, already turning toward the cafe. "Of course. I'll go right now." The next few hours were a blur of activity as Winona helped Clara prepare sandwiches and fill canteens, her mind constantly returning to the image of a scared young boy lost in the vast, unforgiving desert. By mid-afternoon, the search party was ready to depart. Dawson, Hank, Sheriff Brewer, and 4 other men from town, all mounted and grim-faced. As Dawson prepared to mount his horse, Winona approached him, handing him a carefully packed satchel of food and a filled canteen. "Be careful out there," she said softly. "The desert doesn't forgive mistakes." "I know it well," Dawson assured her. "We'll find him." Acting on impulse, Winona reached up and squeezed his hand. "I'll keep a lamp burning in the window until you return." Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of the unspoken feelings that had been growing over the past weeks. Dawson's fingers tightened briefly around hers. "I'll look for it," he promised, his voice husky. Then he was mounting his horse and leading the search party out of town, leaving Winona standing in the stable yard with her heart racing and her emotions in turmoil. She had not meant to reveal so much with a simple gesture, but the thought of Dawson facing danger had broken through her careful reserve. The hours of waiting were among the longest of Winona's life. She tried to occupy herself with sewing, then with reviewing the livery accounts, but her mind kept straying to the search party and the missing boy. At dusk, she lit the promised lamp and placed it in her window, a beacon in the gathering darkness. Mrs. Holloway had taken to pacing the boardwalk in front of her establishment, her face drawn with worry. Winona brought her tea and sat with her for a while, offering what comfort she could. Other townspeople gathered as evening deepened into night, the mood somber as they waited for news. It was well past midnight when Winona, dozing in a chair by her window, was startled awake by the sound of horses approaching. She rushed downstairs and out into the stable yard just as the search party rode in, exhausted but triumphant. There, seated in front of Dawson on his horse, was a small, dirt-streaked boy, looking equal parts embarrassed and relieved. "Timothy!" Mrs. Holloway cried, rushing forward as Dawson carefully handed the boy down. The reunion between mother and son brought tears to Winona's eyes, but her gaze was drawn to Dawson, who dismounted with visible weariness. His clothes were dusty, his face streaked with sweat and grime, but his eyes, when they met hers, were bright with relief, and something else, something that made her breath catch. "You found him," she said as he approached, leading his tired horse. "In a dry creek bed about 12 miles out," Dawson confirmed. "Twisted his ankle trying to track a rabbit and couldn't walk back. Smart kid, though he stayed put and conserved his water." "You're a hero," Winona said softly. Dawson shook his head. "Just doing what needed doing." He glanced toward the stable. "I should see to Thunder. He worked hard today." "Let me," Winona insisted. "You're dead on your feet. Go wash up and rest. I can manage a horse." After a moment's hesitation, Dawson nodded gratefully. "Thank you," he said, handing her the reins. As he did, his fingers brushed hers again, and this time the touch lingered deliberately. "I saw your lamp," he added quietly. "All the way from the ridge. It helped." Winona felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I'm glad," she whispered. As she tended to his horse, making sure Thunder was properly rubbed down, watered and fed, Winona found herself humming softly, a lightness in her heart despite the long, anxious day. Something had shifted between her and Dawson, and though neither had spoken of it directly, she sensed they were moving toward something new and profound. The next morning, Winona awoke to the unusual sound of silence from the stable below. Concerned, she dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, only to find Hank alone in the yard, mucking out stalls. "Morning, Miss Whitaker," he called cheerfully. "Boss said to let you know he's given everyone a late start today after last night's excitement. He went to check on the Holloway boy, said he'd be back mid-morning." Relieved, Winona thanked him and returned to her room, using the unexpected free time to catch up on a sewing project for the mayor's wife. She was so absorbed in her work that the knock on her door an hour later startled her. "Winona," Dawson's voice came through the wood. "Are you decent? I've brought breakfast from Clara's." Heart suddenly racing, Winona set aside her sewing and smoothed her hair. "Yes, come in." Dawson entered, looking refreshed after his rest, carrying a tray laden with biscuits, eggs, and coffee. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, setting it on the small table. "And I wanted to thank you for yesterday, for helping with the preparations and for taking care of Thunder." "It was nothing," Winona said, moving to pour the coffee. "How is Timothy? Ankles sprained but not broken." "He'll be fine, though his mother might never let him out of her sight again." Dawson accepted the cup she offered, their fingers brushing in what was becoming a familiar, cherished contact. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Dawson spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "I've been thinking," he began, setting down his fork. "The livery's doing well, especially since you organized the accounts. I'm considering expanding, buying the vacant lot next door, building more stalls." "That sounds like a good investment," Winona said, genuinely pleased for him. "The town is growing and you've built a strong reputation." Dawson nodded, but there was a hesitancy in his manner that intrigued her. "It would mean more work, more responsibility. I'd need more help not just with the horses, but with running things. I'm sure Hank would be up to more responsibility, Winona offered, and you could hire another stable hand. That's not quite what I meant, Dawson said, meeting her eyes directly now. Winona, these past weeks with you here have been the happiest I can remember. Not just because of how you've helped with the business, but because of you. Winona's heart began to pound so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Dawson, let me finish, he said softly. I know you came here seeking independence, not attachment, and I respect that. But I find myself hoping that perhaps in time you might consider. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. A partnership, of sorts. A partnership, Winona repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. In business to start, Dawson clarified, his eyes never leaving hers. I'd like to offer you a permanent position managing the accounts and operations of the livery with a fair share of the profits, not just wages. But I hope it might grow into something more if you were amenable. The careful, respectful way he phrased it, offering her economic independence first, with the possibility of a deeper relationship if she chose it, touched Winona profoundly. Here was a man who understood what she valued, who saw her as a person with dreams and abilities, not just as a woman to be claimed. She began, her voice catching with emotion. I would be honored to consider such a partnership, Dawson. The smile that lit his face was like the sunrise, bright with hope and joy. Truly, Winona nodded, suddenly shy despite the happiness bubbling within her. These weeks have been special for me too. I've found more than just safety and employment here. I've found a place where I can be myself. And much of that is because of you. Dawson reached across the table slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused against her smoother skin, the touch sending a pleasant shiver up her arm. I don't want to rush you, he said earnestly. We have time to see how things develop, but I wanted you to know where I stand and that your place here is secure, regardless of what else might grow between us. Winona turned her hand in his, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that felt both daring and right. Thank you for understanding what I needed, what I still need. Independence doesn't have to mean being alone, does it? No, Dawson agreed, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. It just means making your own choices. Later that day, as Winona worked in the office while Dawson dealt with customers in the stable yard, she found herself pausing occasionally to watch him through the window, the confident way he handled the horses, his patient explanations to a young boy about proper hoof care, the respect with which he treated Hank and the other workers. Each observation added to her growing certainty that what she felt for Dawson Alden was unlike anything she had experienced before. The town, too, seemed to sense the shift in their relationship. Clara winked knowingly when they came in for dinner that evening, and Mrs. Gunderson made a point of mentioning what a fine match they made when Winona stopped by the mercantile the following day. Even Miss Granger, typically reserved, commented that Winona seemed particularly radiant during their afternoon session at the school. Winona found she didn't mind the gentle teasing and observations. There was a fundamental difference between being pushed toward a loveless marriage of convenience and choosing to open her heart to someone who valued her for herself. The next few weeks brought a deepening of their connection, as Dawson courted her with a mixture of traditional gestures and thoughtful respect for her independence. He brought her wildflowers gathered during his rides, took her on picnics in the gentler evening hours, and introduced her to his favorite spots around Vulture City, a hidden spring with surprisingly lush vegetation, a rocky outcropping that offered spectacular sunset views, an abandoned homestead where desert birds nested in the rafters. They shared their first kiss on one such excursion, as they watched the sun sink below the horizon from the rocky overlook. It was gentle and unhurried, Dawson's hand cupping her cheek with tender reverence, Winona's fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. When they parted, the look in his eyes' wonder mingled with deep affection made her feel more treasured than all her father's wealth ever had. "I'm falling in love with you, Winona Whitaker," he confessed, his voice husky in the gathering twilight. "I think I started falling the moment I saw you standing in the desert, refusing to give up despite everything." Winona's heart soared at his words. "And I with you, Dawson Alden," she replied, the admission bringing a sense of rightness and peace, though I tried very hard not to at first. He chuckled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I noticed. You're very determined when you set your mind to something. A trait you seem to appreciate," she teased, leaning into his touch. "One of many," he agreed, before drawing her close for another kiss that left her breathless and certain that she had found something precious beyond measure. Their courtship progressed steadily through the summer months, as Vulture City baked under the relentless Arizona sun. Winona's position at the livery expanded as Dawson had proposed, with her taking on more responsibility for the business operations while he focused on the horses and expansion plans. The arrangement suited them. Both Winona enjoyed the challenge and independence, while Dawson appreciated her sharp mind and organizational skills. Her work at the school continued as well, with Miss Granger reluctantly admitting that Winona had a gift for teaching. "The children respond well to you," she observed one afternoon as they watched the students file out after lessons. "The town council will be meeting next month to discuss the assistant teacher position. I've recommended you for it." Winona thanked her, genuinely touched by the older woman's endorsement. Though she had come to love working at the livery with Dawson, she also cherished the hours spent with the children, watching their faces light up with understanding when they grasped a new concept. The sewing work had become more selective. Winona now accepted only the most interesting or lucrative commissions, focusing on special occasion garments that challenged her skills and commanded premium prices. Between her various endeavors, she had managed to save a tidy sum, giving her a security she had never known in her supposedly privileged life in Philadelphia. It was in August, as they celebrated the completion of the livery expansion with a small gathering of friends and customers, that Maxwell Jenkins reappeared in their lives. He had been away on business in San Francisco for much of the summer, but now he strode into the livery during the celebration, flanked as always by his men, his expression calculating as he surveyed the improvements. "Quite an investment, Alden," he remarked, helping himself to a glass of lemonade from the refreshment table. "Must have cost a pretty penny." "It's already paying for itself," Dawson replied evenly, though Winona could see tension in the set of his shoulders. Jenkins's gaze shifted to Winona, who stood nearby chatting with Mrs. Gunderson. His eyes narrowed slightly as he took in her confident posture and the easy way she interacted with the townspeople. "Miss Whitaker," he said, approaching her. "Still playing at being a bookkeeper, I see." "My offer of more suitable employment remains open." "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins, but I'm quite content with my current position," Winona replied coolly. "In fact, I'm now a partner in the business." Jenkins's eyebrows shot up, and he glanced between her and Dawson with obvious disapproval. "A partner? How? Progressive of Alden." His tone made the word sound like an insult, though I wonder what your father would think of such an arrangement. Winona felt a chill at the mention of her father. "My father's opinions no longer concern me," she said, striving to keep her voice steady. Jenkins smiled, a calculating gleam in his eye. "Perhaps not. but I imagine Emmett Whitaker would be very interested to know where his daughter has ended up. Philadelphia's a long way from Vulture City, but information has a way of traveling when money smooths its path. The blood drained from Winona's face. "You know who I am." "I make it my business to know things, Miss Whitaker," Jenkins replied smoothly, "especially about newcomers to my town." Imagine my surprise when my business associate in Philadelphia mentioned that Emmett Whitaker's daughter had disappeared rather than marry Reginald Thornton. The description matched, and well. He shrugged. The rest was easy to piece together. Dawson had moved to Winona's side, his expression thunderous. "Whatever game you're playing, Jenkins, it ends now," he said in a low, dangerous voice. Jenkins held up his hands in mock surrender. "No game, Alden, just sharing some interesting information with the lady." He turned back to Winona. "Your father has offered a substantial reward for information leading to your return, Miss Whitaker. $5,000 is a sum that might tempt many in this town." The threat was clear, and Winona felt fear coil in her stomach. If word got back to her father, he could force her to return, or worse, send men to bring her back against her will. At 20, she was still legally under his authority in many respects. "What do you want?" she asked directly, lifting her chin despite her fear. Jenkins smiled, pleased to have gained the upper hand. "Nothing at the moment, but it's always good to have leverage. Enjoy your celebration, Miss Whitaker. Alden." With a tip of his hat, he departed, leaving a chill in the air despite the August heat. The rest of the gathering was subdued, the joy of the occasion dimmed by Jenkins's thinly veiled threat. When the last guest had left, Winona sank onto a bench in the stable yard, trembling now that she no longer needed to maintain her composure. "He's going to tell my father," she whispered as Dawson sat beside her, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "We don't know that," Dawson said, though concern lined his face. "He's playing with you, establishing power. Jenkins likes to remind everyone that he holds the strings in this town." "But he could tell him," Winona insisted. "And my father would come or send someone. He wouldn't let the embarrassment stand me refusing the match he arranged, running away like some character in a sensational novel." She looked up at Dawson, fear evident in her eyes. "He could force me to go back." Dawson's jaw set in determination. "I won't let that happen," he said firmly. "We'll figure this out, Winona, together." That night, Winona slept fitfully, her dreams haunted by images of her father appearing to drag her back to Philadelphia, of Reginald Thornton's cold eyes as he claimed her as his bride, of Dawson watching helplessly as she was taken away. She woke before dawn, her heart racing, and dressed quickly, needing the comfort of Dawson's presence. She found him already at work in the stable, brushing down a nervous mare that had been brought in the previous day. He looked up at her approach, concern immediately replacing his concentration. "You didn't sleep," he observed, setting down the brush. "Neither did you," Winona countered, noting the shadows under his eyes. Dawson sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've been thinking about what Jenkins said, about your father." Winona nodded, leaning against a stall door. "So have I. I need to be prepared if word gets back to him." "What would happen?" Dawson asked quietly. "Legally, I mean. Could he force you to return?" "I don't know," Winona admitted. "I'm of age, but unmarried women. The law often still sees us as under our father's authority." She straightened her shoulders. "But I won't go back willingly, Dawson. I can't." Dawson was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful as he absently stroked the mare's neck. "There's one way to ensure he couldn't claim legal authority over you," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. Winona's heart skipped a beat as she realized what he was suggesting. "Marriage," she whispered. "Yes," Dawson confirmed, turning to face her fully now. As a married woman, you'd be under your husband's protection, not your father's. He'd have no legal right to force you to return. The practical, protective nature of the suggestion was so like Dawson that Winona might have smiled under different circumstances. But there was something in his eyes of vulnerability, a question that told her this was more than a pragmatic solution to their problem. "Is that the only reason you're suggesting it?" she asked softly, her heart pounding. Dawson crossed the space between them in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. "No," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Winona, I've been trying to find the right moment, the right words. I've been carrying this for weeks." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band set with a modest but brilliant diamond. "It was my mother's." Winona's breath caught as he sank to one knee before her, still holding her hands, his eyes never leaving hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I love your strength, your determination, your kindness. I love the way you've built a life here through your own efforts, the way you've opened your heart to this town and its people. I love that you refuse to be anything less than your full self." He took a deep breath. "Jenkins's threat may have pushed up my timeline, but it hasn't changed what I want to ask you. Winona Whitaker, will you marry me? Not just to protect yourself from your father, but because I want to build a life with you as partners in everything." Tears blurred Winona's vision as the full weight of the moment settled around her. 6 months ago, she had fled an arranged marriage to a man who saw her as property. Now she stood in a stable in a frontier town, being offered a very different kind of marriage, one based on love, respect, and genuine partnership. "Yes," she whispered, her voice strengthening as certainty filled her. "Yes, Dawson, I will marry you." Joy blazed across his face as he rose, slipping the ring onto her finger before gathering her into his arms for a kiss that promised a future brighter than anything Winona had dared to dream. They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony performed by the local judge, with Clara, Mrs. Gunderson, Miss Granger, and Hank as their witnesses. Winona wore a dress of ivory silk that she had sewn herself, adorned with lace from Mrs. Gunderson's store. Dawson, in his best suit, looked at her with such adoration as she walked toward him that Winona felt her heart might burst with happiness. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but the meaning behind them was anything but conventional for the time. They promised not only to love and cherish each other, but to honor each other's independence and strength, to be true partners in the life they would build together. News of Jenkins's threat and their hasty marriage spread quickly through the small town, as such things inevitably did. But rather than judgment or speculation, Winona and Dawson found themselves surrounded by support. The people of Vulture City had come to know and respect them both, and there was a general sentiment that Jenkins had overstepped his bounds. "Let him try to cause trouble," Clara declared at the small reception held at her cafe. "He'll find this town ain't as easily cowed as he thinks." "And if your father does come looking," Sheriff Brewer added, raising his glass to the newlyweds, "he'll find his daughter is a respected businesswoman and the wife of one of our most upstanding citizens. Not much he can do about that." The confidence of their friends bolstered Winona's spirits, and as she and Dawson returned to the livery to the rooms above the stable that would serve as their home until they could build something larger, she felt a sense of security she had never known in her father's mansion. "Mrs. Alden," Dawson murmured as he carried her over the threshold, a tradition he had insisted upon despite Winona's amused protests. "I do believe this is the start of a grand adventure." "I believe you're right, Mr. Alden," Winona replied, wrapping her arms around his neck as he set her gently on her feet. "Though I must say, the adventure started the moment you found me in the desert and said ride with me." Dawson's answering kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of the night and the lifetime to come. And as Winona surrendered to the embrace of the man, she had chosen the man who had chosen her for all that she was. She knew with absolute certainty that she had found something far more precious than the wealth and position she had left behind. The newly married couple settled into a rhythm of life and work that suited them both. Winona continued to manage the livery's books and operations, while also securing the assistant teacher position at the school, a role that brought her great satisfaction as the fall term began. Dawson focused on the horses and expanding their breeding program, his expertise becoming increasingly sought after by ranchers throughout the territory. Together, they purchased a plot of land on the edge of town and began building a proper house, modest but comfortable, with a study for Winona and a workshop for Dawson. The process was slow, as they did much of the work themselves with help from friends, but by Christmas of 1876, they were able to move into their new home. And of Maxwell Jenkins, the mine owner had been surprisingly quiet since their hasty wedding. Occasionally, Winona would catch him watching her with calculating eyes when their paths crossed in town. But he made no further threats, nor did he seem to have contacted her father. "He's waiting," Dawson observed one evening as they sat by the fire in their new home, discussing Jenkins's strange restraint. "Men like that, they're patient when it suits them. He's waiting for the right moment to use what he knows." "Or perhaps he's decided it's not worth the trouble," Winona suggested, though she didn't quite believe it herself. "The town has made it clear they support us." Dawson reached over to take her hand, his thumb gently rubbing over her wedding band. "Whatever he's planning, we'll face it together. You're Mrs. Alden now, and even your father would find it difficult to challenge that." February of 1877 brought unusually heavy rains to the Arizona Territory, turning the normally dusty streets of Vulture City to mud and causing minor flooding in some of the lower-lying buildings. The livery, situated on slightly higher ground, remained mostly dry, though Dawson and his workers spent many long hours digging drainage ditches to protect the horses and equipment. Winona divided her time between helping at the livery and continuing her teaching duties, often returning home in the evenings with her boots caked in mud and her spirits dampened by the relentless wet weather. But the warm welcome of her home and her husband's unfailing good humor, despite the challenging conditions, never failed to restore her. It was during this soggy period that the letter arrived, a thick envelope with a Philadelphia postmark, addressed to Mrs. Dawson Alden, formerly Miss Winona Whitaker. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the formal notation in the corner, from the offices of Harrington and Sons, attorneys at law, sent a chill through Winona that had nothing to do with the damp weather. "Dawson," she called, her voice tight with anxiety as she stood in their small front hall, the unopened letter trembling in her hand. He appeared from the kitchen, drying his hands on a towel, his expression immediately concerned when he saw her face. "What is it?" "A letter," Winona said, holding it out to him. "From Philadelphia, from lawyers." Dawson crossed to her side, taking the envelope and examining it with a frown. "Do you want me to open it?" Winona shook her head, steeling herself. "No, I should do it." She took the letter back and broke the seal with fingers that refused to be entirely steady. Inside was a formal letter on expensive stationery, along with several legal documents. Winona scanned the contents, her expression changing from anxiety to disbelief to something approaching shock. "What?" Dawson prompted, unable to bear the suspense. "What does it say?" "My father is dead," Winona said, her voice hollow with surprise. "He suffered a fatal apoplexy last month." Dawson's arms came around her, supportive and warm. "I'm sorry," he said softly. I don't know what I feel, Winona admitted, leaning into his embrace even as she continued to read. He was my father, but he was also. He wanted to sell me Dawson, like I was nothing more than a business asset. It's all right to have complicated feelings, Dawson assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. Winona nodded absently, still focused on the letter. There's more. Apparently, I'm his sole heir. He never remarried after Mother died, and there are no other children. She looked up at Dawson, bewilderment in her eyes. Despite everything, he left everything to me. Everything, Dawson echoed, clearly trying to process this. The house in Philadelphia, his business interests, investments, everything, Winona confirmed, shuffling through the documents. There's a note here from the lawyer. Apparently my father changed his will after I left. The previous version had established a trust that would only give me access to the money if I married according to his wishes. The new one simply leaves everything directly to me, with no conditions. Dawson guided her to a chair, sitting beside her as she continued to examine the papers. That's unexpected, he said finally. There's a personal letter, Winona said, extracting a sealed envelope from among the legal documents. Her name was written on it in her father's distinctive hand. With trembling fingers, she opened it and began to read aloud. Winona, if you are reading this, I have departed this world, likely without making amends for the grievous wrong I did you. Your mother would be ashamed of how I treated you, and in my final days I have come to share that shame. Your disappearance forced me to confront the man I had become, a man who would sacrifice his only child's happiness for financial gain and social advancement. It is a bitter realization to face at the end of one's life. I do not ask for your forgiveness, as I do not deserve it. But I do ask that you accept what is rightfully yours. The enclosed documents will give you full control of all my assets. Use them well, and perhaps some good can come from the fortune that I valued above my own daughter's well-being. If you have found happiness in your new life, whatever and wherever that may be, know that I am glad of it. It is more than you would have found in the marriage I tried to force upon you. Your father, Emmett Whitaker's silence fell as Winona finished reading, tears streaming unchecked down her face. Dawson's arm tightened around her shoulders, offering wordless support as she processed her father's final message. He knew, she whispered finally. He knew where I was. Jenkins must have told him, Dawson said, his brow furrowing. But why wouldn't your father have come for you or sent someone? Winona reread the letter, searching for clues. Maybe he had a change of heart. He says my disappearance forced him to confront what he had done. She looked up at Dawson, wonder mixing with the grief in her eyes. Perhaps in the end, he wanted me to be free to choose my own path. The implications of her inheritance gradually sank in over the following days, as Winona corresponded with her father's lawyers and began to understand the extent of her new wealth. She was, by any standard, a very rich woman, richer by far than most of the residents of Vulture City could imagine. What will you do with it? Dawson asked one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. The question was asked without a hint of self-interest, simply genuine curiosity about her intentions. Winona had been pondering this very question for days. I don't want to leave Vulture City, she said firmly. This is our home now, but the money, it could do a lot of good here. How so? Dawson prompted, taking her hand in his. The school needs a proper building, for one thing, Winona replied, enthusiasm growing in her voice. And medical facilities. Dr. Hamilton does his best, but he's working out of what amounts to a large shed. And I was thinking, a library perhaps? Books are so hard to come by out here. Dawson smiled, lifting her hand to his lips. You're thinking of investing in the town, not just enjoying your wealth. "Is that strange?" Winona asked, suddenly uncertain. "Not strange," Dawson assured her. "Remarkable. Most people who suddenly came into such a fortune would be planning trips to Europe or mansions in San Francisco. You're thinking about what Vulture City needs." "It's given me a home, a purpose," Winona said simply. "And it gave me you. I want to give something back." The arrival of spring brought not only the desert's brief but spectacular wildflower bloom, but also the beginning of Winona's carefully considered improvements to Vulture City. Working with the town council, she established the Whitaker Foundation, dedicated to enhancing education, health care, and quality of life in the growing mining town. Ground was broken for a new schoolhouse, a proper building with multiple classrooms, a library, and quarters for teachers. Dr. Hamilton found himself with funds to expand his practice and purchase modern medical equipment. A reading room was established in a vacant storefront, filled with books ordered from publishers in the East, open to all residents regardless of their ability to pay for a library card. Winona and Dawson's personal life flourished alongside their business ventures and community projects. The livery expanded its operations to include a horse breeding program specializing in sturdy, intelligent mounts suited to the rigors of frontier life. Winona continued teaching, now in the school that bore her family name, finding deep satisfaction in opening young minds to the world of knowledge. Their home, once one of the most modest in town, was expanded to include a larger kitchen, a dedicated sewing room for Winona, and a nursery, the latter addition prompted by the joyful discovery in the summer of 1877 that they were expecting their first child. Dawson's reaction to the news had been everything Winona could have hoped for: pure, unbridled joy, followed by tender concern for her well-being. He had lifted her in a gentle embrace, his face alight with happiness, before setting her carefully back on her feet as though she had suddenly become fragile as glass. "Are you happy?" he had asked, his hands framing her face with reverent care. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Winona had replied truthfully, covering his hands with her own. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Winona maintaining her teaching duties and foundation work until the final months, when Dawson insisted she rest more. Their son, William Emmett Alden, was born on a crisp February morning in 1878, healthy and strong, with his father's blue eyes and what promised to be his mother's auburn hair. Holding their son for the first time, Winona felt a sense of completion she had never known. Here was the family she had chosen, built on love and mutual respect rather than obligation or financial advantage. As Dawson sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders and his expression one of awestruck adoration as he gazed at their child, Winona knew with absolute certainty that every step of her journey, from her desperate flight from Philadelphia to that fateful moment when Dawson found her in the desert, had led her exactly where she was meant to be. "He's perfect," Dawson whispered, gently touching their son's tiny hand. "He is," Winona agreed, leaning against her husband's solid strength. "And he'll grow up in a home filled with love, with parents who want him to find his own path in life." "Just like his mother did," Dawson said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Life settled into a new rhythm with young William's arrival. Winona took a temporary leave from teaching, focusing on motherhood and managing the foundation's projects from home. Dawson proved to be a devoted father, often carrying William in a sling across his chest as he went about his work at the livery, proudly showing off his son to customers and friends alike. As William grew from infant to toddler, Vulture City grew as well, transformed by the Whitaker Foundation's investments and the general prosperity of the region. New businesses opened, More families settled in the area, and the rough mining town began to develop the amenities and institutions of a more established community. Maxwell Jenkins, whose mines continued to be the largest employer in the area, watched these developments with mixed reactions. He had been noticeably subdued since Winona's inheritance became common knowledge, maintaining a cool but civil relationship with the Aldens when their paths crossed. There were rumors that he had expected some financial reward from Emmett Whitaker for information about Winona's whereabouts, a reward that had never materialized. "He underestimated my father," Winona remarked to Dawson one day as they watched Jenkins emerge from the bank, his expression sour. Whatever game Jenkins was playing, it seems father outplayed him in the end. "And now you outrank him socially and financially," Dawson observed with a hint of satisfaction. "That must really stick in his craw." In the summer of 1880, with William a sturdy 2-year-old with his father's charm and his mother's quick mind, Winona and Dawson faced a decision about the Philadelphia property. The lawyers had been maintaining it, but the costs were substantial, and neither of them had any desire to live in the East. "We could sell it," Dawson suggested as they discussed the matter one evening, sitting on their porch while William slept inside. "Use the proceeds for more improvements here." Winona nodded thoughtfully. "Or we could turn it into something useful, a school perhaps, or a home for orphan children." The idea took root, and by the following year, the Whitaker Mansion in Philadelphia had been converted into a home and school for girls without families, with a particular focus on preparing them for independent lives through education and practical skills. Winona corresponded regularly with the woman she had hired to run the institution, taking quiet satisfaction in transforming her childhood home, once a place of stifling expectations, into a haven of opportunity for young women who might otherwise have few choices in life. Life continued to bless the Alden family. A daughter, Clara Rose, joined them in 1881, named for the cafe owner who had become one of their dearest friends. The little girl had her father's dark hair and her mother's determined spirit, evident from her earliest days. The livery thrived under their joint management, becoming known throughout the territory for the quality of its horses and the fairness of its business practices. Winona returned to teaching part-time as the children grew, finding joy in balancing her roles as mother, teacher, businesswoman, and philanthropist. Dawson, for his part, never ceased to marvel at the woman who had become his wife. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked her once, as they watched their children playing in the yard of their comfortable home. Leaving behind all that wealth and position in Philadelphia, Winona had smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Not for a single moment," she replied with absolute conviction. "What good is wealth without freedom? What use is social position if it comes at the cost of your very self? And now you have both," Dawson observed. "Wealth and freedom." "I have far more than that," Winona corrected him, taking his hand. "I have purpose. I have community. I have our children." She looked up at him, love shining in her eyes. "And I have you, Dawson Alden, the man who found me when I was lost and said, 'Ride with me.'" "Best words I ever spoke," Dawson murmured, bending to kiss her softly. As the years passed, Vulture City grew into a proper town with a future beyond the mines that had birthed it. The Whitaker Foundation continued its work, expanding to support infrastructure, arts, and education throughout the region. The Aldens built a legacy of fairness, generosity, and community spirit that influenced the development of the young community. Their children grew strong and confident, raised with values that honored both their parents' journeys, Dawson's hardworking self-reliance and Winona's courageous determination to chart her own course. William eventually took over management of the livery, introducing innovative breeding programs that kept the business thriving into the new century. Clara, with her mother's love of learning and teaching, became the headmistress of Vulture City's growing school system, ensuring that education remained a priority even as the town's character evolved. And Winona and Dawson. They remained partners in every sense of the word in business, in community leadership, in parenthood, and most fundamentally, in a love that had begun with a chance encounter in the desert and grown into something as enduring as the mountains that surrounded their home. On their 25th wedding anniversary, celebrated with a gathering of family and friends in the garden of their home, Dawson presented Winona with a gift, a small wooden box he had crafted himself. Inside lay a delicate silver bracelet engraved with two simple words, "Ride with me." "Because you're still my best adventure," he told her as he fastened it around her wrist. "And I'd choose you all over again every time." Winona, her auburn hair now threaded with silver but her eyes as bright as ever, had cupped his weathered face in her hands. "As would I, my love. From Philadelphia to Vulture City, from wealth to poverty and back again, every step led me to you, and I wouldn't change a single one." As the setting sun gilded the desert landscape around them, Winona reflected on the long journey from that desperate day when she had fled her father's house with nothing but a carpetbag and determination. Never could she have imagined then that her act of defiance would lead not just to freedom, but to the fullest expression of what life could offer: love, family, purpose, and the profound satisfaction of helping build something lasting and good. She had been cast out for refusing an arranged marriage, but what she had found instead was a life arranged by choice, by love, and by the courage to create her own destiny. And it had all begun with a dusty cowboy who had found her walking alone in the desert and said those life-changing words, "Ride with me."